Hello and welcome to Newsfire. I'm Ayza Omer. Now, one of the key features of the G20 summit concluding in Argentina over the weekend is that US-China tariff war ceasefire. Now, stocks in Asia and US have immediately had a positive shift, trading higher and going up in value. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping have agreed to withhold further tariffs on each other's countries for 90 days. But experts express doubt that any concrete steps to totally ease tensions between these two economic global giants can be achieved within this time frame. Now, I'd like to welcome our experts on the panel today to help us understand the nuances of this debate. Joining us today are economist Dr. Ishfaq Hassan and Dr. Waqar Basood from Islamabad. Thank you so much for speaking with Newswire. Let me start with you, Dr. Waqar. How do you feel about this 90-day time frame?
Well, I'm very happy to hear this development. There is so much jitters in the international market, and I'm sure it will go to unnerve the investors. The global system was threatened by this tariff war. Clearly, nobody can say how long it's going to last, but it's the beginning. This was needed to signal at least that the two sides are ready to sit down. And I hope that the two sides realize the kind of stakes that are involved if they don't overcome this impasse and the risks that are posed to the international system of trade. In fact, it is a very unfortunate development that we are receding or reversing the gears of globalization. There is everywhere you see there is talk of nationalism, and nationalism means basically erecting barriers to trade, barriers to immigration, and generally the interaction at the multilateral forums also. These are all very unwelcome developments for turning the globe into a single village. So we hope and pray that this thing translates into a solid understanding between these two countries, and they come out of the brink and agree to a future of cooperation.
Of mutual trade and cooperation. Tariffs that have been imposed with President Trump's starting off with trying to create more jobs, trying to create jumpstart the American industry again, forcing consumers to buy American-made. Now, this is not just a new issue. He's not only done this with China. I'm trying to understand if the American president, who agreed to not raise tariffs further by 25% as was expected in January, can he really iron out his differences with President Xi?
It's a tall order, but you know, the two sides, in my assessment, America stands to lose most. The China is advancing, China is marching on the road of creating a world of its own. It is in America's interest to remain competitive, remain a player in a global system, and not to disrupt it. So I suppose that, I cannot say, whatever damage has been done, and the fact that the Chinese are sort of talking to them and have given them some leeway, agreed to purchase agriculture products or some additional imports from U.S., the Chinese economy is much stronger. It is marching. It is all set to catch up in nominal.
But don't you feel that maybe
also
President Xi is also facing a lot of pressure within his government, as the Chinese economy is seeing in this quarter a rather slow turn of profits?
Well, the Chinese challenges are very different, and obviously the reason that he has agreed to an impasse and in the process given concession also to to U.S. Is reflective of the fact that the Chinese are not interested in trade wars. The Chinese, ironically, they are the torch bearer of multilateralism, environment, free trade, and all those things which, frankly, it was America who led the process after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, I mean, I wonder what has happened to the American mind, and I wish that, there will be deep reflection in the U.S., in U.S. administration. I mean, American economists, the general U.S. opinion is in favor of, not fighting, stopping this war. That's neither here nor there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waqar. We have Dr. Ishfaq on the line with us. We were talking to Dr. Waqar Masood about the timeline that has been set out to sort the trade issues between China and the US. This 90-day timeline, in your opinion, how realistic is this?
The relationship between China and the United States, as far as trade is concerned, has been soured by the move which has been taken by the United States. Particularly U.S. policies vis-a-vis China, as well as Canada, Mexico, and for that matter also the European countries.
Yes.
It has been in a difficult period during this period of time. Now what has been discussed in the recent G20 meeting, that there will be a pause of tariff war for some specified period. And China has also agreed to reduce or lower the duty of imported U.S. car in China. So some respite in trade war has taken place. In the meantime, several other G20 members have also asked to review and relook at some of the agreements of the WTO. So something are moving in that direction, that you need to adjust the new trading environment, taking the United States concern into account. And there is a pause between United States and China in terms of trade war, which is, I think it is good for not only for these two countries, but it is also good for the entire world, because it was suffocating the international trading environment.
Yes, absolutely. In some reports, IMF has gone and said that about 0.5% of the global growth has been affected as a result of this tariff war between China and the US. But if we were to compare just these two economic giants with each other, who was the biggest loser in this?
I think everybody is a loser. There is no winner. United States is a loser because the United States is seen as someone who now doesn't believe in free and fair trade. He doesn't believe in the existence of WTO. He wants to change all the working of the WTO. So United States is seen as someone who is confronting the current international trading environment. So, and also China has also suffered in terms of their exports. Not that much, but you can see some tension or pressure building in China. There is some pressure in European Union, Mexico, Canada. So all the friendly countries with United States, they are at war with, or United States is at war with the partner of friendly countries or allied countries in this trade war, which is not good for any country.
Right, but Dr. Ishfaq, President Trump has been on this front foot, imposing sanctions left, right and center. He's done it with Mexico. He's done it with several European Union countries. He's done it with Canada. And as a result, has received retaliatory tariffs also on some of its main exports, namely motorcycles, alcohol, cheese, etc. Now, do you feel that maybe there has been internal pressure building up within the US by manufacturers, by consumers, to have maybe changed President Trump's stance?
You see, it is quite natural that if United States imposes tariff on the imports of other countries, the other countries would also retaliate. In this retaliation, what happens is the prices of commodities will go up, and it is the consumer who will be the affected. When consumers are affected, the demand will be affected. When demand is affected, the supply will be affected, and therefore this will lead to slow down the trade growth globally and also regionally vis-a-vis these two countries.
And what about the industry, the local industry that Trump thought he would be able to kickstart when forcing consumers to buy local made? Was he able to achieve any of those targets?
See, if United States imposes tariff on imports and forces its own consumer to buy its local product, the others will do the same thing. So in other words, the world is moving towards inward-looking policies from outward-oriented policies.
This is very interesting because Dr. Waqar... Sorry, I just want to add here, Dr. Waqar said the same thing. There seems to be a rise of nationalism across the globe. So if we were to look into Pakistan's economy, how do you feel like this global giants having this tariff war, how does it affect Pakistan's economy, or does it even?
You see, Pakistan is not a major international trade. So this, the trade war between United States and China, United States and Europe, United States and Mexico or Canada, Pakistan will not be affected to that extent because we are not a major player in international trading environment. Our share of our exports in global exports 0.3%. Similarly, in imports, it is more or less on the same number. So we are not a player, and therefore it will not affect Pakistan much because we are not that much trading countries which can affect the global trading environment.
So, and when we look at this, again, coming back to the amendment to stop the tariff wars, there were no details shared about this meeting that came out between President Xi and President Trump. But in your point of view, what kind of strategies would have to be implemented between both countries to make sure that this doesn't escalate further from January?
The best strategy is negotiation. Let the Chinese and the United States officials that deal with trade and commerce should sit down and work it out. The grievances of each other. Simply imposing tariff will attract retaliatory imposition of tariff, and at the end of the day, it is the global trade which will suffer. When global trade suffers, it is the global economic growth will suffer to that extent. Therefore, it is not in the interest of anybody, any countries, particularly the United States, to involve itself in trade war with any country. Negotiation is the best policy.
Right, and President Trump has accused Beijing time and again of intellectual property theft. He's also talked about how barring American companies to operate within China is affecting a basically fair play of the equal contributors to the economy. Do you feel like this entire situation might have changed China's stance or methodology of how they do business with the world?
You see, it is the stance of the United States, but China doesn't seem in that way. So how can you resolve this issue? When you sit down and discuss bilaterally. Today, as you've seen, that there is a temporary respite in trade war vis-a-vis the two countries. Take this opportunity of negotiating a deal within this period of time. And it is the interest of both the countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishfaq. Now we are joined in the studios on the line with Mr. Khurshid Kasuri. Let me ask you here about what your take on the G20 summit was, on the meeting, especially between President Trump and President Xi. What does this translate into when we are looking at diplomatic ties between the two countries?
Okay, as far as the G20 meeting is concerned, there's a general sense of relief that at least this trade war between two economic giants has at least had a pause. It's not been resolved. Some sort of a ceasefire has come in. But in my opinion, things have really changed dramatically, and they're never going to come back to square one, because China has realized that it cannot depend, as it used to in the past, on America as a market, and it's bound to try and become self-sufficient, particularly in those technologies where it faces almost, if not a ban, with great difficulty in accessing the US market, because the Americans are making it very difficult for Chinese businesses to go into high-tech in California or elsewhere. They're even making it difficult for Chinese students to enter universities with subjects like robotics and artificial intelligence. So, but it's a good thing. But I think both realize that China is a rising superpower. America is a superpower. Unfortunately, they have not learned. The United States doesn't seem to have learned a lesson from the 20th century, mid-20th century, when European powers tried to resist the rise of Germany, First World War, later on resulting in Second World War. But anyway, it's a good thing that they have decided to have a rethink.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Khurshid Kasuri. Let's move on to Mr. Sardar Asif. I was asking Mr. Kasuri the question, and I would like your take on it as well, that on a diplomatic front, how does this trade war between China and the US affect their relationships and, in turn, relationships with the rest of the world?
You see, the recent G20 meeting has been held, the summit. It appears that there is some thaw in the tension, and there may be some relief in the trade war that was initiated by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, by initiating this trade war, not only with China but also with Europe as well,
yes,
has threatened the entire architecture of world trade, which has taken 2 centuries to reach this point where you had international consensus on how trade should be conducted. He started by clamping tariffs on Chinese imports to USA.
yes,
And then China retaliated by countervailing tariffs. And so this trade war was beginning to escalate. And in this, China was the loser and USA was the loser. Very few people are aware that a lot of American manufacturing, even in high-tech industries, is done in offshore companies, mostly in China. So once this war has got going, it has affected the U.S. industry as well, because the world will have to pay a higher price, and U.S. industry will gradually become less competitive. And secondly, it has affected the U.S. agriculture, because China was the biggest, I think it was the biggest purchaser of U.S. agriculture products like soya beans and other things.
But if we were to look at it from, now that is the economic side of it, as well as the fact that US owes a lot of money to China in terms of debts, hitting $1.17 US trillion. Now, but how much of this is also a diplomatic front where maybe President Trump realizes from the response seen within United States, from his future voters, that he needs to maybe change his stance in how he deals with trying to increase local-made manufacturing or local-made buying. Do you feel like maybe Trump has come to realize that this is not going to be the way out in trying to kickstart his industry?
No, I think there are other considerations. I think the Bible Belt has been hit very hard because that is the mid-America, the heartland of America, where soybean production and the corn production and the wheat belt is all there. Mm-hmm. And soybean, America has been building up huge stocks of soybean because they lost the biggest market. And the end product of that was that Trump has lost the House of Representatives and has got a major defeat in the Senate as well, although he has a majority.
Right. So, now, very quickly, last question before we wrap up, Mr. Sardar, is that how do you see, given the history of U.S.-China relationship, how realistic is it to achieve anything constructive in this 90-day timeline?
I think the one positive note out of this summit has been that they have frozen their differences for 90 days. And in these 90 days, trade will be negotiated at 10% custom duties and tariffs. Okay. And which is, I think, acceptable to both countries. So in these 90 days, they'll be able to negotiate something advantageous for both countries. Now here there is a problem here. The U.S. imports more than $500 billion worth of Chinese goods, whereas China imports far less, only about $120 billion annually. So there's a huge balance of payment difference. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine that this difference can be bridged easily because of the nature of the economies.
Right.
So this difference will remain.
Okay, we unfortunately only have this time. We have to take a quick short break, and when we return, we'll be talking about the latest coming from the G20 summit. Stay with us. You're watching Newswire. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. Now, President Tayyip Erdogan said during the G20 summit in Argentina that solving Khashoggi's killing would also be in the interests of the Saudi monarchy. Now, he's also said that Turkey's insistence on finding the truth behind the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi was not aimed at damaging the Saudi royal family's reputation. Now, Khashoggi's killing at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October this year has strained Saudi Arabia's ties with the West and kind of battered their image overseas of its de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, let me introduce our guests today who will be talking to us. Right now, we have Mr. Mansoor Jafar, who is joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much. Let me ask you this first. How do you see President Erdogan's statement after Turkey's accusations on Saudi Arabia on not doing enough?
Actually, since day one, when this gruesome murder took place, the President Tayyip Erdogan has used very cautious language regarding the incident, and he did not put any direct blame on the royal monarchy vis-a-vis this incident. And but there has been hue and cry in the Turkish media, I would say, especially some anti-government media. They were trying to make they were trying to internationalize the issue of Khashoggi murder in such a way that it can directly hit the Saudi monarchy or the Saudi royal family. And in the meantime, we saw that the Turkish government, especially Tayyip Erdogan, he made a statement that I am astonished to learn about that statement, because in that statement, he demanded from the Saudi Arabia that the culprits who were involved in this murder, they should be handed over to Turkey. Knowing the fact that there is no extradition treaty between Turkey
Saudi Arabia and Turkey. But let me ask you to expand a little on something you've just said, that you felt that Erdogan was very cautious with his statements coming out on Khashoggi's murder and Saudi Arabia's role in it. But you also mentioned that you felt that the local television, the media coverage seem to have highlighted the issue a lot. Are you suggesting that maybe they were on some kind of agenda or completely out of line with what the government's take on this issue was?
Certainly, there had been a lot of media freedom in Turkey as well, because this Turkish media that was considered against the Erdogan regime had given them very tough time during the past as well. So this issue was of an international nature and a high-profile murder case. So they wanted to exploit this issue to settle their score with the Erdogan and then involve him in direct conflict with the Saudi government or Saudi monarchy.
But why would they want that?
Sorry?
Why would they want that? Why would they want to bring their president Erdogan into conflict with Saudi Arabia?
The political tussle that has been going on between the US-based Golan and the Erdogan regime in Turkey, because all the media that was making hue and cry on this issue, that was basically pro-Golan media, or owned by mostly the US-based exile leader. So they were trying to settle two scores, or they were trying to kill two birds with one stone.
And how do you feel the Western world's response to Mohammed bin Salman has been, seeing the kind of reaction we have seen in photographs, in the statements coming in, such as UK Prime Minister Theresa May has said she's been very direct with MBS, asking this matter to be taken seriously. How do you feel the West is reacting after having met MBS in the G20 summit?
Actually, it corresponds to the West set-up agenda themselves, because since day one, when this murder took place, we saw that initial statement that was coming from the American, especially Trump, that was very hard-hitting statement. But later on, he realized the what we call the ramification of his statement, and he started budging back from that statement. And likewise, the statement, the G20 summit reaction, or which has been propagated as you can say the indifferent attitude towards the MBS presence over there, because it was G20 summit. It was not hosted by the Saudi Arabia or any other country. So usually the exchange of niceties or the talks which take place on the sideline of such events are usually of this nature. So, but the very presence of Saudi Crown Prince in that summit speaks the political weight, speaks about the political weight and the strategic depth of the relation of Saudi Arabia with the Western world, and especially in this G20 summit.
And what are the sentiments within Saudi Arabia about all of that has happened regarding Jamal Khashoggi's murder, and the Western stance on trying to get to the bottom of this mystery, that who is behind it?
Actually, the Saudi people, they are having full confidence in the government and in the judicial system that is being practiced in Saudi Arabia over the period of time. And there have been what we call very clear instances in the Saudi judicial system, where even the people who were belonging to the royal family, they were brought to book and they were prosecuted, and in many cases they were executed even. So the Saudi people are having full confidence in, and I would like to add about the reaction of the Khashoggi family himself, his sons, his daughters, and even we have seen the photographs of MBS with one of his nephews in a very nice way. So they have full confidence in the government and in the judicial process that is taking place, and we don't see any what to call even if we scan the social media, that is free, because you may say that in Saudi Arabia there is a controlled media and mostly the people cannot express themselves freely. But as far as the social media is concerned, we don't see any what to call demands that calls for the prosecution of the MBS or involve the royal family. So they are fully adhering or they are fully backing the due process of law that is taking place right at this moment in Saudi Arabia. And because the first reaction that came from the first feedback that came from the judicial quarter, that was very encouraging, because it demanded the prosecution, the execution of 5 involved people, and so it's still in progress, or the matter is sub judice as the moment we speak. So we hope that the Saudi judicial system, they will uphold their tradition of doing the justice and bringing the people who were involved in this conflict to their logical end.
You mentioned with great faith in the Saudi judicial system, I'm sure, but we've seen a lot of changes in statements. Now, Saudi Arabia's public prosecutor was quoted in October 25th in state media as saying Khashoggi's murder was premeditated. Now, this account was a big change in what was being said earlier. And also, even now, the judicial process that has taken place, and 11 people have been supposedly sentenced to death. What was the process? What evidence was that they had has not been shared with the West at all, which is basically where the public protest is coming from?
Actually, the public protest that is coming from various quarters, I would like to mention the recent incident that took place in Tunisia when MBS landed over there. That protest has basically was orchestrated or organized by an organization that is called An-Nahda, and it's the ruling party over there. And they were facing the murder charges of opposition leader in Tunis, and even the president who is sitting present over there, Waji al-Qaed, he himself has made a statement in which he alleged that the An-Nahda party, they have threatened him to kill.
Okay, so but now I want to come back to the Khashoggi's, the suspects charged for Khashoggi's murder. Now, sorry, let me correct myself. 11 had been charged and 5 have been sentenced to death. But none of this information of what was the evidence that they were charged against, who are these people, they've not been identified fully, or this been shared. Why is there such a sense of secrecy?
Because the trial is still going on. They have not come to the logical conclusion of the case. So when the judgment will be finally announced, certainly it would come up with the rationale and with the evidence. Each and everything will be made public. Because at this moment of time, if the evidence presented or the things presented before the court or judicial authorities are made public, there is likelihood that the people who are interested in having or in twisting the facts, they can exploit these things. So it is just a precautionary measure, or it is the hallmark of the Saudi judicial system that it's not done in the way people are perceiving it to be done.
Now, let's talk a little about diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Now, President Trump has always advocated for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from the start. How do you feel like maybe diplomatic ties have changed stance since this murder of Khashoggi?
I don't see any diplomatic stance being changed between Saudi Arabia and Trump, because Trump regime, because now the Americans, they are having they are safeguarding or they are protecting their economic interests and their diplomatic relations with the Saudi Arabia, keeping in view the war they have been waging in various parts of the world, especially in the Middle East, because they don't want to lose an ally, a trusted ally like Saudi Arabia at this moment of time. That is why they are all the statements that have been pouring in from the Washington up till now, even from the CIA desk or from the Mr. Pompeo statement, all are suggesting that they did not find any
direct connection between MBS and the murder. Right, but what about the West? What about European Union countries who, like Germany, France, who have already imposed sanctions on several suspects, on up to 18 people, some of them also related to the royalty, and also frozen any arms deal between Saudi Arabia? How does this affect the monarchy, if at all?
Actually, they are trying to settle the scores with the what we call the Saudi Arabia, especially they are trying to settle their own ills that pop up in the form of their what we call Americans' withdrawal from this nuclear deal, and they wanted to favor the Iran at this moment of the time, and they just wanted to. They are making the tall claims regarding the involvement of the royal monarchy in this incident, just in order to pressurize Saudi Arabia so that they can come to the, they can bring them to the terms that favors the Iran at this moment, and so that the European Union countries are declared or given waiver from the trading links with Iran at this moment of the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mansoor Jafar. With that, we're going to wind up this story and move on to the next segment, but let's first take a short break. Welcome back to Newswire. Now, the past 4 years have been the hottest on record, and global emissions have been rising rapidly when they need to fall by 2030 by at least half of what they stand today. Now, according to the UN, climate action must be increased fivefold to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade that scientists have advised. Now, these targets are really tough and especially harder to achieve with growing dissent and skepticism on part of global leaders towards climate change. Now, I'm joined in the studio here by Mr. Rafi Alam, environmentalist, lawyer, and also by the ex-Secretary Climate, Mr. Abuzar Akif. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Now, this G20 summit has ended in Argentina on a really sad note, it seems like. There are more and more countries that seem to be showing skepticism towards whether achieving this commitment or continuing this commitment towards climate change is even worth the trouble.
Really? Because I read the last IPCC report. That's not as much a technical document as a call to arms for normal people to realize that we are the last generation that can actually do something about climate change. And I might also add that while the rest of the world is concerned about whether it should be 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, I was in a conference last week in Islamabad where there was presentations by Dr. Ghulam Rasool, who's the former Director General of the Pakistan Met Department, and Dr. Zia Hashmi, who's a PhD in climate change, who said specifically that even at 1.5 degrees, Pakistani glaciers will melt disproportionately higher than other estimates. So Pakistan is slated to suffer worse at 1.5. And so the question for me, sitting here in Pakistan, is where is the moral outrage in our position when we go to COP?
Absolutely nothing. We don't hear even from in an international forum who's participated, what stance is being taken, and even translating into government policies. And here I want to pull you in, Mr. Akif. What's your take on what Mr. Rafi Alam just said? Basically talking about that there doesn't seem to be any moral outrage here in the country about what climate change is doing to us.
Before the moral outrage sets in, we need a lot of awareness. It seems that even our top-level bureaucrats are not aware. And the Ministry of Climate Change really does not figure very high on the list of ministries as far as the bureaucracy is concerned. And so you don't have the top-level bureaucrats who are vying for finance or defense or maybe establishment or other more prominent ministries. And climate change really does not figure in our policy, because when I was the secretary, the total share of the development budget that the ministry had was less than 0.01%. Out of a total development outlay of 100 billion rupees, we had just less than $1 billion. So had it been $1 billion, we would have been 0.01%. So, I mean, that's what the government policy is. Now, fortunately, we hope that we'll have more forestation. But forestation is just one part of the climate change equation. We need to really curb, although, of course, we are not a very big polluter. I mean, just China, US, India, and Russia account for 51% of the global greenhouse gases. Just
but the fallout seems to come down to all the third world countries, especially in the South Asian, Southeast Asian belt.
Yeah, the fallout will come because the atmosphere of the Earth is unrestricted. There are no national boundaries as far as the atmosphere is concerned. So if the whole globe heats up, our glaciers will melt also. So unfortunately, there needs to be a moral outrage at the international level also.
But moral outrage, we're looking at President Trump trying to roll back what Obama worked very hard to achieve in terms of giving independence to states to basically decide their own control over pollution, on how much emissions are allowed, what is the minimum or maximum level. And there is a very strong automakers lobby backing him up over there, despite the outrage we're seeing over there. I mean, he's basically celebrated in a way a victory for his holdout stance on removing the US from the Paris Agreement. I mean, that doesn't look very good. Does this trickle down across other countries who have so far been committed to the Paris summit?
I mean, commitments are verbal. Action must be real. So all those people who committed, those 200 countries which committed at Paris, I mean, the level of commitment can be seen from the actual pledges for the Green Climate Fund, which was said to be about $100 billion. But the actual action is less than $10 billion. So, I mean, commitments and verbal promises are very easy. But unfortunately, we are not seeing the kind of action which is required to keep. I mean, now the new report, Paris was about keeping it less than 2 degrees.
Right.
But the new report now says that we must keep it under 1.5 degrees.
So the margins are getting slimmer. What's your take on this, Mr. Rafi? More talk, no action?
It's not looking good for climate action. The way Paris is set up, as Akif Saab said, it's voluntary contributions you make, greenhouse gas emission reductions. And different countries have different approaches. There are, however, plenty of success stories. The US is an outlier, but even within America, you have to understand that most national economies are spurned by their cities and regions. And most states and big cities in the United States actually comply largely with Paris sort of commitments on greenhouse gas reductions. Take California, for example, which is one of the largest industries in the world. It has air emission and climate standards that are far more advanced than the rest of the United States and actually are a model to the international world. We also have now increasingly political movements speaking now to energy policy in Europe. In Germany, for example, which still has remnants of energy coming from coal, there are now political protests seeking to have that coal banned. So although there is a lag politically, and our scientists are telling us that we might not have the time, to wait, there is a lag politically, but there is some hope at the horizon that within the next election cycle or 2 election cycles, we'll start seeing responses at the policy level. Unfortunately, our scientists have told us that that's not enough time.
Right, and now we're seeing this COP24 starting here in this very cold-friendly country. How do you see this developing? Do you feel like it's a 2-week summit, it's going to take a while before we see anything. Do you feel like this is again an example of not much being done, or are you hopeful?
Well, one of the ramifications of the United States moving out of Paris was that the world sort of lost a climate leader. In Davos last year, the president of China announced that China would be taking the international moral stage on climate action. So we look at this COP and see how China is going to now take the lead and show the rest of the world how things could be or should be done. And also think that although China is a huge net emitter of carbon, it has over the last 10 years taken significant policy changes and initiatives to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, studies have shown this year that even though the drop is not significant, at least the increase has stopped, which is a big move. Mr. Akif, what is your take on the COP24 starting today? Are you hopeful of how this will...
I mean,
Sorry,
yes,
go ahead.
I'm always hopeful, but from the Pakistani point of view, I must underscore the fact that only a 2-person delegation is going to the COP. Before, we used to have 10 or 15 people, while the present thinking in Islamabad is that maybe these foreign trips are pleasure trips, which is not the case. Just the advisor and 1 more person is going. And at any COP, there are tens of sessions which are running concurrently. And just to have the Pakistan seat occupied, there should be some human body behind the Pakistan label. So I think more people should have gone from Pakistan. And of course, now the time, I mean, even if we tried now, we would not get the visas in time. So unfortunately, the commitment to really be at the COP doesn't exist. And we are just joining the bandwagon of the like-minded group and the group of 7-7.
Which is a serious tragedy, because if we are talking about numbers here within Pakistan and how our industry gets affected, how we face labor losses year after year, where do we stand in terms of awareness? And I'm talking about from a government point of view. You've worked as a Secretary Climate. How do you feel do we stand in terms of awareness within the mechanism of the government itself on how dire this situation is for Pakistan?
Yes, I mean, while I'm always hopeful, unfortunately, the level of awareness which is required doesn't exist, because one of the things with climate change is that it is such a cross-cutting issue, that climate change is everybody's baby. And because it's the urban planners' issue, and it is the forestation issue, so because the issue is so divided with all these sectors, it's very difficult to get the kind of awareness, because people normally play their own turf.
Okay, I think we've lost his audio. We'll get back to him on this comment. But Mr. Rafi, very quickly, the government seems to sort of hail their efforts as significant. They talk about tree plantation all over and, to combat air pollution. Can you clarify a little bit how effective is this tree plantation really?
I think people planting trees should be lauded and appreciated whenever they do it. But let's speak directly about this new government and the climate challenges it faces. Pakistan signed the Paris Agreement, ratified it, and has submitted its INDC, its nationally determined contributions. However, those contributions don't amount to much, because Pakistan has stated on record that it intends to increase its greenhouse gas emissions by a factor of 400% by 2030, because we're a developing country. And in order to mitigate these emissions, we will require international aid of the tune of approximately $7 to $12 billion per year. So essentially we're saying, if you don't give us the money, we're not going to do anything. That's the leveraging position Pakistan has taken to this COP24. This was a position adopted by the previous government.
Okay.
This new government is one of the few that actually has a climate advisor. It had climate change as part of its manifesto. Environment is a core of the billion tree and 10 billion tree tsunami projects. Why are they not changing this stance that we've taken to COP? Why is this not being reviewed? Pakistan needs dramatic change in its energy policies and its natural resource policies. We can't just throw our hands up and say we're not going to do anything about it. For instance, just air pollution, where major greenhouse gases are the same pollutants that we inhale. Pakistan has such poor air pollution that I think air quality is a greenhouse mitigation that Pakistan could do. For instance, that would be a dramatic departure from our policy of adaptation. So there's room for development, there's room for improvement. I don't understand why this government, which is committed to environment improvement, hasn't taken this low-hanging fruit.
Mr. Mr. Rafi's mentioned that the leveraging position that they used in the last government, and now even though there is awareness, they seem to be giving somewhat the issue priority, but there's no sort of turnout to this, there's no turnover. Why do you feel like there's such a dearth of action?
One, of course, I mean, at the moment the government is all but bankrupt. And in our INDCs, which is the document that we sent to the UNFCCC, we are just awaiting the aid. We have said that we need $7 billion per year for adaptation, and we need almost $40 billion for our mitigation, and that money is nowhere near coming. So, I mean, unfortunately, rather than having a waiting for aid stance, we need to start to do things ourselves.
What about the air pollution issue? We're seeing a major contributor in substandard oil that is being brought in for transport vehicles, the two-stroke engine vehicles, the rickshaws and the motorcycles, which are predominant in our streets or on our roads. We surely don't just need aid right now to take care of certain very glaring issues.
Some countries have gone to Euro 4 and 5 standards. We are not even Euro 2 compliant, because the refinery in Karachi does not want to put up the machinery to produce Euro 2 compliant diesel. So it's one organization which is not complying. The government has actually shifted the goalposts on even Euro 2 many times. So I mean, the seriousness which is required at the national level is missing.
So the seriousness, like you said, on the national level, missing, definitely. What about grassroots movements? Where do we stand on that?
We have very few civil society grassroots movements that are aware of climate change. Climate change is such a horizontal issue. It's not a single thing. It impacts. You have to ask yourself, what is climate change in Lahore? Because it's going to be different than climate change in Sialkot or in Karachi. Its applications to community or its effects on community will be very, very different. Climate change right now in Pakistan means floods. And for a lot of people, what that means is loss of crops, loss of hospitals, and loss of roads. So it's an infrastructure loss. We have to better understand how climate change is going to impact us before we really get that sense of awareness. So what we need now is leadership.
Right.
This is not a stance where we wait for an election turn to come or wait for the people to say. We need visionary leadership at this point to help us and protect us from the impacts of climate change.
Absolutely. And Mr. Akif, what do you feel that the government not being very active in terms of bringing any concrete rules and regulations? If you were to take a stance on this, if you were to make a roadmap, what would be the first thing that you would impose as a rule on the public to try and curb the emissions that we are seeing coming out of Pakistan?
Pakistanis are poor people, and so we don't have so much consumption of beef. I mean, it is said that just by cutting down on the beef intake to once a week, we'll cut down greenhouse gases by 50%. But generally, I mean, it's the elite which actually sort of impact the climate more by using their vehicles and using energy. But overall, we need, as Mr. Rafi Aram has said, we need much greater leadership than just forestation. And even on the forestation issue, 2 billion trees per year actually mean 5.5 million trees per day. So, I mean, just aspirational targets will not help. We need real...
Mr. Akif, very quickly, we're running out of time. Mr. Rafi, I want your concluding remarks on this. It's very interesting. I could expand more on the curbing beef and planting 5.5 million trees a day.
No, that indeed, meat has an impact on water as well, not just greenhouse gas emissions. There's a disconnect with how serious the implications of this COP are and the political reality we're seeing in response to this in Pakistan. There's a huge disconnect. And I hope that in the coming years, this government, committed as it said it would be, will take proper and appropriate leadership access on this issue.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Rafi and Mr. Akif, for joining us here on Newswire, talking about a very critical and crucial issue. Pakistan and the rest of the world faces climate change and the rising greenhouse gas emissions. We will see you tomorrow on Newswire. Stay tuned to Indus News.